Zach, we meet again. It's good
Indeed.
to talk to you about Eternal Sunshine. In the in the early afternoon, we talk about movies, and in the evening, we pet cats.
Exactly. I'm quite looking forward to petting some cats
Yeah,
tonight actually.
we're braving COVID to pet cats. That's what we're doing.
We are. Got to get
Yeah.
that, the physical touch. It's big, even if it's a cat.
I'm pretty sure we're on the low tier though, so I think there's a more advanced sort of elite VIP cat petting area that we won't have access to, and we'll see them in there. They might have tinted mirrors so that we can't even see them, or maybe we can see them but they can't see us. That would make more sense.
Wow.
The
Yeah,
VIPs.
I've never been to one of these. Have you been to a cat petting cafe?
I think I went to one. It might have been in. It was either in China or it was in Japan. I can't remember exactly where, but I know I've been to one at some point. They might have had
Maybe
cats and other animals as well.
hmm,
Oh, it
maybe
was in Beijing.
maybe
Yeah,
you had a bad experience with a cat and you had to get your memory erased.
yeah. There you go. I don't think so because then that would be jogged by having two cats right every day.
Mm.
I would be in constant trauma. You would
Yeah,
think. Maybe I am. Maybe it's so far repressed that my constant state of trauma is just sort of gurgling beneath the surface.
right. Like
Yeah.
a deep, like emotional memory.
Right. Yeah, that's why I'm always stressed.
Man,
So I've always got hives somewhere. Um, so maybe we're going to be talking about Eternal Sunshine, and maybe a sort of baseline, a good starting point would be a general summary. And I'm assuming that anyone watching this will probably have seen the movie because it's not one of those super niche movies. I think most people have seen it. It's kind of a cultural must see, right? It's not really a cult film, is it?
yeah, I think it was pretty big when it came out
Yeah.
in the early 2000s. So, um,
Yeah, but just as a refresher, because people may not have seen it since 2006, 2005, maybe. I can't remember
2004, I
exactly.
think.
2004. Okay. Um, do you want to take a whack at it?
Sure, I can do my best. So it might be a little bit difficult to tell it linearly because the movie jumps around a lot in time. But
Yeah.
yeah, maybe we can just tell it as it happens on screen and not really worry about how it's happening in time.
Yeah, it would be harder to do that, wouldn't it? I mean, it might be harder to do it. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So for anybody who hasn't seen the movie, it's a bit of like Tarantino editing. The beginning of the movie is actually towards the end in terms of time, and then it jumps back in time and then jumps back to the present. So yeah, I can take a crack at it. So the movie starts with one of the main characters, Joel Barish, played by Jim Carrey, and he wakes up in his apartment. He's kind of in this melancholic mood. He lives in New York City. He's going about his day. He's about to go to work, and he notices that his car has a big dent in it. He doesn't know where it came from. He noticed there's some pages missing from his journal. So he's about to go to work like every other day, and then he gets this sudden impulse to get on a train and go to Montauk. And he
Which is at the
says he
very
does,
tip of Long Island. It's way out there. You can't go any
right,
farther. Yeah.
right, exactly. Get
Last
on
stop on the LIRR, I think, right?
yeah, he does. He takes the Long Island Railroad. So, uh, you're hearing his monologue, and he says, "I don't know why I had this impulse. I'm not really an impulsive person, but here he is, just getting on this train." So he goes up to Montauk, and it's the middle of February. I think it's like a couple days before Valentine's Day, and he keeps bumping into this woman who has blue hair. I think she's wearing her orange sweatshirt, and they kind of look at each other for a while, and finally she introduces herself. They have this kind of eerie feeling that they've met, but they're not sure where.
She
And
does.
her
Does
name's,
he?
I think she says maybe we met at Barnes and Noble.
But does he say, "Oh yeah," because he's sort of like he's
Oh
saying,
yeah, I think he.
why do I fall in love with every woman I see?" But he's
Right.
not.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think it does occur to him that they've met, but for her, for some reason, she has this kind of feeling like, I know you, I've seen you before.
Right.
He's kind of like, I don't think so. But anyways, she introduces herself, and right away she picks up this woman's very quirky, it's very kind of unpredictable, and they end up. He ends up driving her home, and they spend the night together, and really have a good time together, and this relationship starts to form. So that's the beginning, and now we get to the next part of the movie, where we see Joel sobbing in his car, completely devastated, heartbroken. And we see that he has recently broken up with Clementine, and he's devastated. And his friend, this couple, they find that
a bickering couple for sure,
right,
constantly. I think that's very intentional, by the way.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we should talk about that as well. But this couple, they break it to him that, hey, we just got this letter in the mail that says that Clementine had her memory of you erased, and that there's this company called Lacuna who will go in and delete people's delete memories.
Yeah,
exactly. Delete people's memories, and so he finds this, and he goes to Lacuna, and he kind of demands to know what's going on. They tell him that you shouldn't have seen this, and this is the procedure that we do here. So Joel decides that, okay, well, she's deleted me from her life. I want to delete her from my life. So he opts to have the operation done. And the bulk of the movie is the company Lacuna deleting his memories of the relationship. And we see Joel and Clementine's relationship from the end to the beginning. And as they are going through and deleting his memory, he starts to realize that, hey, this actually isn't what I want. And he starts to fight the process internally while they're deleting his memory. And fast forward at the end, when he wakes up, we realize that the beginning of the movie is really happening right after his memory was deleted. So this scene where they had met on this train going to Montauk really happened right after. So we realize now that they had already been in this relationship and decided to both delete each other and had completely forgotten each other. And it leads to there's quite a bit I'm leaving out, but
the only thing I can supplement is that there are characters happening simultaneously with the deletion process that probably have some relevance. There's this annoying twerp, for lack of a better word, Patrick, who has used all of Joel's lines to start dating Clementine. There's Howard, who's the guy who's, one would guess, developed this process, since we don't know of any other company that does it, and he thinks it's a scam at first, so a genius. And then they're kind of a couple, right? The one doing the erasing, what's his name? And his girlfriend, who had an
Stan.
affair with Howard before.
Yeah, Stan and Mary, who is the receptionist, kind of younger receptionist at Lacuna, who has a crush on Howard, who is the doctor.
And just keep working here after we erase your memory in our relationship. Yeah, you can keep your job. That's fine. I'm sure nothing will go wrong. I'm sure it'll be just fine. That's a weird choice.
Right.
I admire his
Exactly.
restraint.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it is worth noting. So Howard and Mary had a history where Howard is a much older and married man, and he had an affair with Mary, who's the younger secretary. And we find out that Howard had kind of pressured Mary into having that memory erased. And then we see this kind of affair play out again, where she, kind of comes on to him, and they get caught by his ex-wife.
In the same way, oddly enough, in the same way she comes on to him with this feeling of being tongue-tied and having this complex of sorts that makes her admire this older man, in the same way, trying to impress him, trying to make him think that she's smart. That's a sort of a repetition of actions. It's not different at all.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that she had her memory erased of this incident and then just fell right back into her old ways, and pretty much, the exact same thing played out again. But this time when Howard tells her, hey, this isn't the first time this happened, and that, we have a history, and, we've gotten caught before, and that you asked to have the operation done, Mary is rightfully pretty angry about it. And she retaliates by taking all of the files of everyone who has ever had the operation and sending them their tape of them saying they want the process done, and calling them. Or no, I'm not calling them. I think she sends them letters.
Yeah. They do the voiceover only because it's her reading the letter.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when Joel and Clementine are getting together the second time, they come across each other's tapes that Mary has sent them, and they're hearing themselves from the past saying all these terrible things about one another, and, quite confused. And they're trying to figure out, why, are you playing a practical joke on me? At one point, he thinks that she's messing with him, and, she tells him, no, I'm very sincere. I don't know what this is. And then he finds his tape of, him saying all the terrible things about Clementine. So essentially, the last scene is the two of them together, having found out that they have a past and that they've been in this relationship, and it's, ended very poorly. And they have to make this decision. Do we start a relationship knowing that we've done this before and it ended horribly? Or do we just kind of go our separate ways? And they kind of shrug their shoulders and they say, okay, let's do it. And so the movie ends with what
Groundhog's
we assume
Day.
what we assume is them starting their relationship again.
Would you say there are indications or suggestions that this time will be different, or is the suggestion that it's doomed to repeat because of their natures, but that's fine because they haven't experienced it in memory?
So, yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think it's what made the movie really powerful to me, was that the movie could have ended with them just getting together and not knowing that they had a past and repeating the cycle. But I think it was very powerful and intentional that they both found out how it's going to end. And I think they both realized, hey, this is ultimately either not going to work out, or it's not going to be as rosy as we might think it will be. Like, it's going to be hard, and there's going to be pain.
The passion is not going to last.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what was powerful to me is that knowing that ahead of time, they both agreed to it. And so that's
going
kind of the
with
difference.
Their eyes open.
Right. Going into it without any of these kind of, fantasies about what it was going to be like. And I thought that was very interesting. I mean, I think when we think about relationships, I think most people are pretty aware of the statistics of how many relationships, end in divorce, or how many marriages end in divorce, or kind of the statistics that, after, I forget how many years it is exactly, but, maybe 2 years, the kind of passion starts to fade. But I think still most people think, okay, well, yeah, that's true, but that's not going to happen to me, or it's not going to happen to us. Like, we're in love, we would never get divorced. But I think what made this movie so powerful is they both kind of realized, all right, this is going to happen to us, but it's still worth it to pursue this.
Which is it's a very powerful concept, not only in relationships, but in the broader sense of life. Because if you accept the reality of being a mortal creature, and you accept the things that are going to happen along the way, that your favorite pet is going to die after 15 years, you still get a pet. Why do you do that? What is the reason? So there's a knowledge of being part of this thing, and I hope this is something we can get into. But the eternal recurrence, which I think is Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence, is, I think, the driving idea behind the film. Is that if the demon says to you, if you could relive your life, or if you had to, you must relive your life, will you curse the demon or will you thank the demon, right? And I think the sort of surface level reading of that is, if I have a wonderful and happy life, then I will thank the demon and I will be happy that I have to relive the same life. And if I have a miserable life, then I will curse the demon. But I don't think that's what, and I'm no Nietzschean or Nietzsche expert, but I think the real meaning of that is, in the sort of totality, this recurring thing, this repeating pattern, this sort of fractal of life that keeps spiraling downward or upward, whichever direction you want. Downward has a sort of negative connotation. Wherever it goes is the way it is, with its agony, with its suffering, and that's why you get these sort of, I mean, if you look at a fractal, these little things that are off on the side, which are also the same thing as the main thing, right? They're little versions of the same thing. So you see these little spin-offs that constantly remind you in the movie, this is all part of this same object that we're talking about, which is this constantly recurring thing, which includes both the ecstasy and the suffering, both the buying the cat and the death of the cat 15 years later. This is an object. This is a sort of a fractal by itself. This married couple, they're constantly bickering and he's talking about his weed and trying to build his birdhouse. That's a very intentional placement of the very standard sort of nagging wife and sort of off in his own bailiwick husband guy who's kind of tired of being nagged, and yet their dynamic is mature, and they've reached not, I think the sort of superficial reading of that is, don't get married, then you'll be these two. But there is a kind of, and maybe I say this in a biased way because I'm married, but it's not like you reach a plateau when you get married and then it's a stable thing and it's just boring. It's just constantly different. The passion that you had in day one or year two isn't the same, but also there's a level of nuance that's very, I think, important and underappreciated if you are constantly aware of what you're part of and what you're doing, the sort of project of a relationship. So I think that's what I mean, that idea, it's not something I really wanted to get into right away, but I think it's kind of worth talking about. That idea, I think, is the thing behind it, really.
Yeah, no, I Nietzsche's Eternal Recurrence or Eternal Return definitely came up. Do you want to maybe spend some more time on that idea?
Yeah, I mean, we're already there, so let's do that. Yeah.
So
Eternal
maybe just
eternal
to,
return is Eliade's formulation, right? And then the eternal recurrence is Nietzsche's, the amor fati, right? Love of your fate.
yeah, and as I have not actually read the gay science, which I believe is where he proposes the idea, but the idea itself, for anybody who's not familiar, is a kind of thought experiment. Imagine if a demon were to come up to you in your loneliest, kind of darkest hour, and say to you, there's not going to be an afterlife. You're just going to repeat this same existence over and over and over again. Having heard that from the demon, would you gnash your teeth and curse him and just
He's not
feel
making
this
metaphysical
despair?
claims. He's just to think about your life, right?
Right. We can talk about that too, because that's its own question. But yeah, so would you curse the demon, or would you call the demon a god and say, "Thank you, this is the best news I've ever heard, and just I'm so grateful for this."
Right.
And he uses this thought experiment to kind of make you evaluate your own life, and in that, if you can't answer the second way, then you're not living your life to the fullest, or kind of the way that you should. And that the goal is to live your life in a way that if you were to repeat it over and over and over again, you would be happy with that.
But not happy in the sort of the bland sense of everything is constantly joyful. I think the deeper sense of happiness, of living in a meaningful way, where you wouldn't look back at I know I use the pet example, at the pet you had, and you wouldn't say, well, because I experienced the pain of my pet's death, therefore I wish I could delete that from my life. You wouldn't do it. Most people wouldn't do it, because they had the totality of the experience over a period of years, and that's like an object in their life. And to subtract it is to subtract part of yourself.
Right. It's embracing everything, the suffering and the joy.
Yeah.
The totality of experience. So, yeah, I mean, I think that idea maps really onto Joel and Clementine's relationship, in that it's basically they're faced with that same question. If you have the chance to do it again, would you do it? Knowing ahead of time that it's not going to be all, joy and roses. It's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. And yeah, they ultimately make the choice that I think Nietzsche would be proud of.
Right. Yeah. And I think that sort of there's kind of then a red herring in the film itself, because you have those two quotations. One is by Nietzsche and the other by Alexander Pope. But the quotation by Nietzsche given in the film doesn't align with that.
Right.
The quotation is, "Blessed are the forgetful, for they get the better even of their blunders," right? Which is that's not what that means. That's like, what is that? Why mention that? Is that sort of to misdirect the viewer, to say, ignorance is bliss, eliminate the pain. If you can't remember the pain and the suffering, that's good for you, right?
Right. Well, that's a big, I mean, that's kind of the opposite, that's the kind of the opposite stance of Nietzsche's Eternal Recurrence, which is ignorance is bliss, and that, it's better to be the blameless vessel and to not have any worry or to not experience any pain.
Can I just read that just for context?
Sure, yeah.
How happy is the blameless vessel's lot? The world forgetting by the world forgot, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind, each prayers accepted and each wish resigned. So that's what the title of the movie is based on, right? But why mention those things if ultimately the end of the movie isn't that? That's not what it is.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that Mary is the one that says both of those quotes, and that she's very taken with this idea of
Yeah.
ignorance is bliss. And she says, I think at another point, like, isn't it great what Howard does? She makes all the pain go away. She's kind of idealizing how great it would be to just be a baby or, a newborn and not have any of these phobias. But
she's got the daddy thing going on as well.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, that's a whole complex, right? The older man being attracted to the older man, and I don't know exactly where what that stems from, but there is a certain wanting to be taken care of or being nurtured by a father type figure. And that's not to say that the daddy thing is necessarily an incestuous thing, but on the sort of the nurturing side, I think it very well could be. I wonder if people who have problems or issues, daughters with their fathers perhaps not being nurtured to the extent that they could have been, or having resentment, develop things like that later on. Not to see older men in the sexual sense as their father, but to want to be cherished and nurtured by someone who is much wiser or older and has that sort of ability to care for you because they have the life experience to do it. I mean, I'm not an expert in childhood psychology, but I have heard that a lot of those things could very easily erupt from childhood or come out of childhood or grow out of childhood, right? Like if you have a foot fetish or a lasagna fetish or whatever, like I do. Mine's lasagna.
Yeah, I think
I just roll around in it.
Right. I think for men, I've read it. It's like between like 8 and 9 is when a lot of your fetishes get imprinted. But yeah, I didn't think of that angle with Mary, that perhaps the reason that she's kind of taken with this idea that ignorance is bliss and how great it would be to be a child is that she wants to remain a child. And maybe that's why she's attracted to this older man who kind of already has status and, stable career. And she kind of envisions marrying him and being provided for.
She talks about that. She says, I used to have fantasies that we had kids together. And she knows that he can be a family man. She knows that he can do that, right?
Right. So, yeah, and she goes through quite a 180, kind of a big transition between having that viewpoint and then when she finds out that she's kind of been duped and that she's, that she has this history with Howard, she rebels by quitting her job and then taking all the records and sending these tapes to everyone.
So do you think that she's representing a kind of a growth where she's this person who's talking about these two fairly straightforward, superficial quotations about essentially forgetting is good and bliss is or ignorance is bliss. Is the 180 a learning moment for her? Is she actually representing a development process where now she understands that we have to at least confront our problems, and so I'm going to make sure everyone else confronts their problems? Or is she not growing and reacting to it by forcing everyone else to experience the same pain that she feels now? I mean, she sends the tapes, but how ethical is it if you force someone to relive something? We don't know that every situation is the same as Joel and Clementine. What if I erased the memory of being raped, for example, and I erased that, and that's not something that I want to relive because it's such a painful thing? She's now forcing that person by getting this tape. They don't know what this tape is. What is this? She's forcing this person to relive a horrifying experience without
maybe
being discerning. Wait, could
Yeah.
potentially. We don't know, but
Right.
she's
Yeah.
she's unilaterally making a judgment for everyone else, and she's essentially stating an ethic that everyone else now has to follow. They have to follow because they take it and they listen to it. They don't know what it is, so their curiosity is going to drive them to do it. And if they do it, they're blameless because they don't know what it is. But she knows what she's doing, and my sort of small issue with that is if it's growth, then do it individually and personally, and don't plant a flag in the ground that is your new ethic that forces everyone else to suddenly sort of comply or at least live by it, which doesn't seem like growth or development to me.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think it was a pretty reactive move. At least the way I interpreted it is that she felt like she felt really dumb when she got caught the second time. And I think her feeling was, wow, I feel like an idiot, and I wish I had never had it erased in the first place. Therefore, I'm going to go about making sure that these other people don't kind of have this similar experience. But yeah, it is kind of short-sighted in that she doesn't really know what can of worms she's opening by sending those tapes.
Right. Yeah, she has no idea, and it's unilateral. She's just doing it for everybody. I mean, that is very, on the face of it, very unethical. I mean, we don't know, but I also wonder if she, by doing a 180 on this, is showing us a mirror, a dark reflection of the Joel and Clementine story, which is when you discover the reality, when you discover that this is part of yourself that you had forgotten, and you realize, or you acknowledge that you feel a certain way anyway, she still feels this way. I mean, she's attracted to this guy. So rather than continuing to pursue a relationship with him, she just hits the panic button and ejects. And pulls the parachute, instead of saying, okay, well, if you really love me, maybe you should leave your wife. Maybe you should do that for me because I love you and I want to see where this relationship goes. So we see this dark reflection of this reactionary tendency, whereas Joel and Clementine are confronting it and pushing through the sort of the membrane of difficulty, and they're not starting fresh, but they're starting the cycle again at least. And we see a kind of maturity there, whereas I think the opposite, the reflection of that, is a lack of maturity in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I think too, it's not really clear whose idea it was for to have Mary's memory erased. Whether it was kind of, they both agreed on it, as Howard said, or if it was more Howard just kind of pressuring her to get, because he didn't have his memory erased. And
right.
so,
which is what I find so amazing, that he just went about his business after that and was never tempted to say anything to her. I mean, that's interesting that he would be willing to keep her on and not find her a job somewhere else.
Yeah, and the fact that we can't really conclude that the reason this cycle occurred again was because she had her memory erased, because he didn't have his memory erased and the cycle occurred again as well. Right. So while we're on those two characters in particular, I found something pretty interesting when I looked up this quote, which the quote is by Alexander Pope.
The Pope one,
and when I was looking up this quote, this article was saying you need a little bit of historical perspective to understand this Pope. Apparently, this poem is based on this love affair between this young woman and her older teacher, and I believe he was worried that the love affair would mar his reputation, and he encouraged her to join a nunnery. And I I believe like her family retaliated by castrating him, and then he became a monk. So this poem, the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind that's in the movie, is written from her perspective in the nunnery. So after she's kind of banished herself from the world. But I found that interesting how much that story lines up with the movie in terms of Howard and Mary's character. It very much is this like.
What is the perspective she's taking? Is she taking a sort of more vindictive perspective, or what is the angle in terms of the relationship?
Oh, okay.
What is her angle when she's writing that as the character?
You're talking about
the nun.
The nun. Yeah. So I wish I had it in front of me, but I believe it was written like years later when she's in the nunnery and she is kind of saying how much better this existence is now that she is, has kind of been forgotten by the world, having joined the nunnery, and has, the world has forgotten about her, and she's kind of forgotten about the rest of the world and how happy this existence is. So I didn't get the sense that it was like vindictive or anything.
Okay. That's interesting. That is interesting. But that's not the simple sense of the happiness of the blameless. I mean, she's saying this after a lifetime of experience and having been maybe betrayed or feeling betrayed at first and going through all of these things. So, I mean, it's a very interesting perspective because it's definitely similar. The relationship is similar, but I don't know. I do find his choice very interesting to not erase his memory of her and continue to keep her on. The first thought that I had is a sort of Jungian integration sense that there's this part of himself, this passion that has sort of risen up, and his maturity has allowed him to integrate it in a very literal sense inside of his business and not let it destabilize, burn his life down, not let it destabilize him. So there is a kind of integration there. I don't think that necessarily that Howard is meant to be portrayed as, a wise sage character, but I do think that's probably intentional because why wouldn't he erase his memory of her, and why would he allow her to remain employed?
Right. Yeah, I mean, you definitely don't get the sense that he erased her memory and not his so that he could continue sleeping with her and having an affair. Like the way it's brought about the second time is very much like he came there to work, he came there to do his job, and
right. I don't think his intentions are right.
But yeah, at the same time, he did keep her on. So I wonder about that too. Like why he chose to keep her on, and maybe he felt guilty. I don't know.
It's also interesting that everyone seems to be dating each other. So after that, now she's dating I keep forgetting that guy's name. The guy with the glasses.
Stan?
Oh, the Hulk. Yeah, Stan. The Hulk and Frodo erasing your memories. Great.
I mean, sidebar, the casting in this movie is incredible, but it was so all over the place. I'm like, the girl from Bring It On.
Yeah, and Mary Jane from Spider-Man, by the way.
Oh yeah, and Mary Jane from Spider-Man. Then you have Frodo Baggins, the Hulk.
Yeah.
Jim Carrey,
Benjamin Franklin from the HBO series of John Adams,
and Rose from Titanic.
Yeah, it's insane. You're right. It's very weird casting, but yeah. I think Kate Winslet and Jim Carrey did an amazing job. They sell it completely. It's great. And maybe we could talk about the characters a little bit, Clementine and Joel, because there's definitely a joining of opposites and maybe we can explore it a little bit. And I don't know how superficial or deep it is, but as it was going along, I kept being reminded of what I've been reading recently in Denial of Death. There's a chapter on Kierkegaard, and I've since picked up a couple other things to read through. But he has this idea of two types, which now we call a person who's depressed and a person who's schizophrenic. Not to say that Joel is necessarily depressed, although he kind of is. Yeah. He's kind of mopey. And not to say that Clementine is necessarily schizophrenic, although she is always referencing this sense of being overwhelmed by the possibilities of life. So Kierkegaard sketches out these two characteristics as problems of the modern person in culture. When there are too many possibilities and you see all possibilities all the time, then you're overwhelmed by the number of possibilities that life holds. And if that goes too far, you essentially lose your tether to reality. You lose the cord that holds you to the ground, and you float away. And
that would be Clementine.
That would be Clementine. But she hasn't gone that far, but she is visually a representation of this. She's got these weird potato things, and she's playing Indian music in her house, and she's changing her hair color all the time. But she's got this one thing that's stable, which is this bright orange hoodie, which is interesting. But there's this sense that the changes that are happening to her are external changes that are sticking to her from the culture and the world around her, and not internal changes or internal movements. Because when there's an internal change or an internal movement in the deeper sense, you go through a sort of a process of shedding a layer or taking on a layer, or working through a problem and changing over time gradually, or sometimes because of trauma, you go in a negative direction or a positive direction. But hers is, I think, a stable personality, which is constantly being repainted on the surface, which is this the sense that you get from
her hair as well.
Literally in her hair, but it's the sense that you get from her that she, and it's why guys and Joel see her as this exciting thing that's going to take them to the moon. It's why people get this sense that she's exciting, but she's not exciting in that sense. She's actually seems like a good, kind, caring person with this sensor that's on that maybe most people don't have, which is to maybe think that the completeness of herself depends on taking in some of these constantly moving things that are going on around her, this constant sort of flurry of colors and shapes and noise and culture, that she can't live without taking some of that on. And that seems to be her weak point. To herself, maybe it seems to be her strong point. Actually, her strong point are the stable things about herself. The fact that she is nurturing, and she has very positive attributes. And the thing that she puts out there to the world is the weakest thing about her, because this is the thing that depends on or is attached to the things that are constantly changing. And that's not just the hair color, but the hair color is a sort of an image of that, right? That right. She feels like she doesn't feel secure to just say, I don't need to constantly sample everything from the culture, right? When Joel is exactly the opposite. Kierkegaard says the person who's shackled by culture is pushed down by culture, so that it seems like there's only one road to go down. There are no branches on the road because your culture has laid everything out. Essentially, the end of your life is just, if you have a good set of binoculars, you can see it, and there aren't any options. And it seems like Joel is just in this repeating cycle of being mundane. Routine. He's a mundane, routine person, but he inside has a spark of chaos. He has this somewhat wicked sense of humor. He has an intellectual side, and so he has, in a sense, the opposite thing, whereas his thing that's more external is the weaker part too. and the weaker part to him is the opposite of Clementine's weaker part. Both of those are on the outside, but his inside is closer to her outside, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love that. I actually didn't think about that, but now that you bring it up, like he's always scribbling in his notebook this really like eccentric drawings of, you know, clowns and all these things. And
right. I didn't say it well, but I think
it's
her outside is his inside, and his inside is her outside. I think that's the simplest way to say it.
Exactly. And she even says at one point in the beginning something like her hair is just like how she just kind of pins a personality on herself, and
she says, I apply my personality in a paste. That's what she says.
That's what it is. Yeah. Right. And he's like, oh, I don't think that's true. And she's just like, how would you know? You don't know me.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. And yeah, she definitely has that kind of anxiety about, you know, she kind of has just extreme FOMO, for lack of a better term, where she even says to Joel at one point, do you ever worry that you're not, you know, using every minute of your life to live life to the fullest? And
but
is
that an insecurity in her, or is that a trait that benefits her? That on the surface could be something that we would say, oh, that's good. But is that, you know, she's saying that as though he's boring and she's doing it the right way and he should be more interesting.
I didn't get that sense. Because she asks him that like at the beginning of the movie. So it would have been the second time they, you know, met.
Mm.
And I think she's asking him genuinely. She's saying, do you ever get the sense that you're just not living every minute of your life to the fullest? And he's just kind of like, nope, not really.
Already picked out my tombstone.
Yeah.
On the epitaph it says, Joel.
Right. But they're definitely, so to talk a little bit about their compatibility and how they're drawn to each other, I think you're right. Joel definitely fits that archetype of the kind of routinized, depressed person, you know, it's kind of melancholy. And then, yeah, Clementine's this kind of chaotic archetype. And I think they're drawn to those opposite parts of each other. Like Joel kind of keeps her stable, gives her kind of a base, something to kind of like plant her feet. And Clementine kind of brings him out of his shell and makes him come alive. And she even says to him, like, you know, so many guys think I'm a concept and I'm going to make them feel alive. And, you know, I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for her own peace of mind. And I think that's true in the sense that Joel definitely idealizes her. Yeah. And there are a lot of examples where he's, you know, kind of drawing up this image of perfection that, you know, once...
She's his anima projection, 100%.
Totally. Yeah, totally his anima projection. But at the same time, she definitely does bring him out of his shell and definitely does make his life, make him feel like he's more alive. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, as the anima projection, it's something that's placed on someone else rather than exactly what they are. But she does bring him out of his shell. But part of the reason that they had their problems was that he had this image of who she was that wasn't necessarily who she was on the inside, which I think is this much more stable person internally with this aspect of chaos. And so maybe that's the hint of, in the second time around, at least that will be part of the story of his knowledge that he was projecting onto her something that wasn't her, and that gets cycled into the sort of the second round.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the same things that they're drawn to each other initially are the same things that he becomes really annoyed with later in the relationship.
Right.
So, you know, he loves her hair at the beginning. He loves the fact that she's impulsive. And then at the end, you know, at the end of their relationship, he's saying like, you're so fucking irresponsible. You could have killed somebody drunk
Right.
driving, or, you know, her hair is bullshit and all of these things. And likewise, I think she's drawn to the fact that he's nice. He's kind of calm. He's, you know, somebody to, you know, he's this kind of home base. And at the end of the relationship,
I like that. He's her home base.
at the end of the relationship, she's saying like, he's boring. You know, you're an old woman, I think she calls him at one point.
Yeah, she does.
So
right.
So yeah, it is interesting, the same things that we're kind of drawn to, you know, the other person, are the same things that can drive us crazy about them.
Jung would say, well, the things we don't like in others are the things we don't like within ourselves, right? So
yeah.
I don't know what exactly those things specifically would be for Joel and Clementine, but there's definitely some of that going on. I mean, usually when you get annoyed with a person, you get annoyed with the person not because of that thing that's out there, but there's a dependence on that thing out there to something that you haven't quite figured out, that's sort of bubbling in the depths, right? That you haven't popped that bubble yet, and it's poking at the bubble, but it hasn't popped because you don't acknowledge that it's there.
Right. Well, so do you think that maybe Clementine deep down feels that she's boring, and that's why she acts in all of these kind of impulsive ways, and that Joel maybe deep down feels like his internal life is just crazy and schizophrenic?
I think that's exactly what's going on, honestly. And I think that's I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to get at with those Kierkegaardian personality sketches is there is this outside and this inside for both of them. And I think especially, well, no, for both of them probably, but for her, the stability is externalized by his behavior, the stability of her personality. But she doesn't see the stability of her personality as a positive trait. She sees the external randomness as her positive trait, but she has it flipped around, because probably her weakest trait is that, and her strongest trait is that stability, that need to just be loved and be happy and be, you know, probably be quiet. And that is something that she hasn't dealt with, and so she feels a sense of insecurity that it's even there. And when she sees Joel have it too much, she can't stand it, because she hasn't recognized that it might be her sort of most powerful trait. Right. Yeah. Maybe. Well, so do you think we've covered those two characters pretty well? Because I do want to bring up Patrick as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to, you know, some of these other themes and other parts of the conversation. Yeah.
What Patrick, just as a reminder, Patrick is this guy who starts dating Clementine after she gets her memory erased and uses a lot of the material from the office to try to woo her. And there's just this constant sense that it's phony. And Elijah Wood, Frodo, does a great job of playing that character, of saying something that's, he's really great acting, saying something that sounds genuine but also sounds rehearsed and fake, but it's also acting, and so it's many sort of layers of baloney, and he does a good job with it, I think.
Right, he's using, in some instances, he's saying Joel's lines like line for line.
Right. Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think Patrick's purpose is in the sort of not the movie, because I sort of see watching a movie as a kind of an excuse to get to the actual, you know, dynamics of the thing. So I'm curious about Patrick's place in that machine, if that makes sense.
So I was thinking about Patrick too, and I think throughout the movie there's this kind of dichotomy between like the kind of Hallmark commercial version of love and kind of everything's perfect, and then the reality of love and relationships, and that they're very messy. And I think the couple, the married couple, I can't remember their names. The David Cross is the.
I think they're supposed to be sort of cookie cutter married couple. So not remembering their names is probably what we're supposed to do.
Right.
They're very.
But I think they
cutter.
kind of represent like the reality, and I think Patrick kind of represents this kind of like hallmark phony idea of love. And he's technically always saying the right things, I mean, because he's literally stealing Joel's lines, and
they're perfect lines delivered at the perfect time.
And he gives her a piece of jewelry that apparently she already had, so she loves it. So in a sense, Patrick should be the perfect guy. But yet there's something about him that she's repulsed by, and a kind of like she picks up on this, on how kind of inauthentic, something about it doesn't feel right.
Right.
And we should talk about whether or not the reason it doesn't feel right is because she is remembering these memories about Joel, and that she's kind of having this deja vu, and that's why she kind of feels like something's off, or if it just feels off because there's no way this guy should know exactly what jewelry I like, or that he should know how to say the right thing. I
think maybe a third option. So I'll just say what I was thinking as I was watching it and thinking about it after, and then you can let me know what you think. But when you speak to someone, you're condensing this extremely complex set of variables into this bottleneck, and it's the bottleneck of noises that you have to say, right? And that is an insane thing to begin with. I mean, just the idea of all of the things I didn't decide to say being selected out of this process of deciding what I want to say. It's insane that I'm able to do it, or anyone is able to do it, because I could literally say anything right now, right? And it's weird that I'm not, I think. I think it's weird that I'm not.
Yeah, it takes a lot of discipline. Yeah.
Well, it's just the fact that we're able to verbalize. So what we do is we hone in on the letters on the page or the verbalization, rather than sort of contemplating all of the circumstances that have to be in place in order for that set of words to be produced, right? The social context, the biochemistry, the brain structure, the situation that we're in, and all of the things that I didn't say as a sort of background consideration, right? The Wittgensteinian sense of sometimes it's just best to just be quiet because some things can't be said, but there are always things that can't be said. But in a conversation, the things that aren't said are always in the background of the things said, and give the things said some sort of context. Does that make sense? You see what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
So when I say something to you, if it is a genuine thing that I mean to say right now in this context, when you hear it, you can appreciate enough of the context because you're in it with me to feel it. But so the words are just a vehicle for me to sort of try to push a brain state over to you that maybe you can get 60 to 70% of fully, but it'll never happen completely.
Right.
So when those words are pulled out of the context and delivered in by a different person in another way, there's this sort of series of watering down steps that happen, right? So when you read someone, you probably have noticed when you read someone that depending on your state of mind, you get something different, right? I've seen this movie 4 or 5 times. Because I knew I was going to be talking about it with you, I had a very different experience of it and appreciation of it compared to the several other times that I've watched it. I might have seen it while I was drinking too much. I might have seen it for the first time and just noticed the main plot details. And so the fact that I knew I was going to have this conversation with you and that I was watching it through that lens changed the entire thing for me.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what's going on. And I think it's just Patrick is an appreciation for the part of a conversation or an interaction with a person that is everything but the words, right? And he just represents the lie. All he does is he's a skin. He's a shell. He's proof of concept that words are irrelevant and that it's meaning and intention and context that matters more.
Totally. Yeah, he reminds me of like the like a pickup artist or somebody who's like using like a set of words that he got from somebody else to say like line for line to, in his case, like seduce a woman.
Right.
And that like, yeah, maybe this conversation played out. Well, it works perfectly for this movie. Like this conversation was perfect and authentic when Joel said these things, but it was in a very specific time and place. But just kind of cherry picking those lines and using it in, you know, your own time and place, it's, yeah, something about it just doesn't ring true because it's not.
Right. It's even though it is true, it's true in the very denotative sense, but in every other sense, as you said, it's not true in a lot of other ways that are hard to verbalize.
Right. Well, it's not true in that when Patrick was laying there, I don't know that he really felt like, you know, he could just die right now and everything would be all right. Like he was saying that because he had the goal of, you know, seducing Clementine. Whereas when Joel said it, he meant it. That was kind of what his experience was, and he was just verbalizing that.
So what is that though when Joel says it and he means it and she feels the intention of that and there is that moment of timelessness, right? That moment of being, but she feels that if that's not some just magical feeling, these waves that float into you from the other person, if it's not that, then what is that? And what is it not that Patrick didn't have? Is it where you are in the relation? I mean, what is that made up of?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of things in terms of like what felt off. You know, it could have been that something about his voice sounded slightly off.
Yeah.
There's the whole thing leading, like we don't know what she said before he said that, or you know. Or maybe they do play that part in the movie, but we don't really know the context leading up to it, and that like he maybe said it kind of out of left field. But yeah, something about it didn't ring true because it wasn't true. And you know, we're very good at spotting when something is inauthentic, or we're very good at spotting bullshit.
Yeah.
In that sense. And we can't exactly always put our finger on like what it is because, you know, a lot of it is these kind of sub communications or little body language, you know, tone of voice and all of that. But we can still tell like, okay, something's wrong. And this, you know, this doesn't feel right.
And in terms of presenting it, I think it's done really well. I believe those two scenes are juxtaposed, right? Where he's doing it and he says it and they do it in the memory. Isn't that happening? Don't they show those side by side?
It's a little bit later. Yeah,
a little bit later. Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But this was a discussion I was having. I watched the movie with my roommates, and we were trying to figure out if Clementine was kind of freaking out because Joel was talking to her in his memory, if there was some kind of magical realism going on there. or if she was just freaking out because something felt inauthentic.
Yeah,
they
I think.
cut,
Go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry, please.
because the movie cuts between they're in Joel's memory, and he's saying, that guy Patrick that you're with, he's a complete liar, and he's a fraud, and he's using my words to seduce you. And then the next scene cuts to her freaking out next to Patrick and, kind of trying to get away from him.
Yeah.
So it wasn't clear to me if, he was somehow communicating with her through his memory, or if, they just kind of cut there.
I mean, the only evidence for that is that she also showed up in Montauk. That's the only
right.
That's the only evidence. But I think that if that were true, then it would dilute the power of what I think the movie is trying to get at more narratively and symbolically, which is that being with someone is this, or love, being with someone in a genuine way, or love is this not transcendent, profound experience that humans get to have, and that when it isn't happening and it's a shell of that, then it just feels very wrong, even though you can't put your finger on it. And so saying that there's a communication or telepathy happening or whatever, I feel like it diminishes the power of that side of it, which is what I think Patrick represents. As you said, you called him the Hallmark card, and I think that's right. It's not a critique necessarily of Hallmark cards, but Hallmark cards represent the
just covering your bases,
withered. It's the withered husk of love. It's the withered husk of the beginning of love. And it's the part that doesn't even matter. And it's the thing that we focus on. What about the chocolate? What about the cards? What about buying the gift? That bullshit has nothing to do with love. It's only the sort of flakes of skin cast off by the first 2 months of love. And we grab at the skin flakes as they fly out of the air. We say, buy things like this, right? And people fall for it. It's very weird to me, but that's what Patrick is. He's a husk of love's shaky, exciting, yes, but shaky, sort of thin, superficial beginnings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What about the married couple then? As you called it a duality or a dichotomy between the married couple and Patrick. Are they just sort of Patrick's foil then? Are they just to preserve the spectrum?
I thought they were there to kind of show the messiness and the reality of relationships, and in contrast to kind of like the Hallmark version of them.
But a reading of that could be, don't get married. Look at your life. Your wife's going to throw laundry at you.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, yeah, but I think the in the end, it's basically Joel and Clementine realizing that is the reality of it, and that even knowing that reality, we can still, sign up for it.
And you don't know what the internal experiences of that married couple are. They have been through both stages. They've probably been through a breakup, getting back together. They've probably been through they definitely were in the early stages of love, the romance, and now they're in the laundry throwing stage. But who's to say, whereas externally we look at it and we say, oh God, we see an old person, very old person, 85-year-old walking by, we say, I'm not looking forward to getting old. But you don't know what it's like to be an old person. Yes, okay, their bones hurt, and they don't have the stamina they used to have, and there are problems with being old, but there are also problems with being young. And I think that a balanced person, whether they're old or young, will have rich experiences throughout and find meaning and purpose throughout, no matter where they are on that spectrum. So I like to think of that couple as just a reminder of the existence of the spectrum and that Clementine and Joel may be headed there, but that is not necessarily a gloomy situation, right? I've been married for 7 years. I love being married, and it is not extremely exciting, but I really like it for other reasons.
Yeah.
And I haven't had the laundry thing, and I don't build birdhouses, but that's just versions of things that happen, I think, in every marriage. It'll come, yeah. I don't have the tools for birdhouse. My neighbors would get pissed off. So I saw it more as just sort of a completion of this whole picture that we're developing of what love is, and what love is between two people from the beginning to the end. And Joel and Clementine are at the in sort of an important inflection point. They're at an important moment in this long process, but really all they're doing is going through a breakup. They're going through a breakup and they're getting back together. That's all it is.
Right. So I think this kind of gets us back a little bit. We were talking about like the theme of death and rebirth, and like the kind of cyclical nature of this film. And we see all of the seasons of their relationship. And one of the cool kind of ways they symbolize this was with Clementine's hair, in that when they meet the first time, her hair is green, which symbolizes spring and growth and kind of new beginning, vitality. And then the kind of honeymoon stage of their relationship, the very passionate part, her hair is bright red, the kind of summer months. And then as some of that passion starts to fade, her hair turns orange. Or not her hair turns orange, but she dyes her hair orange. And, that's when the relationship, they start to get bored with one another. They start to get on each other's nerves. And then ultimately when they break up, or after they break up, her hair is blue,
right,
which symbolizes winter,
ice,
cold, ice. Yeah. And then,
yeah, that's good.
I don't know if this was intentional,
observation.
But at the end of the film, like the roots of her hair are not dyed blue all the way. And her like brown hair is starting to kind of come in, and there's like a little bit of like a green. I could just be imagining that.
I'll have to.
But
check
I
that
think
out.
that symbolizes that this cycle is reoccurring, and it just, the wheel keeps spinning. So, so yeah, I mean, I think you can look at a relationship as being one of these cycles, like when we zoom all the way out, or we can look at it as like this cycle playing again over and over throughout like a longer relationship.
Right.
So like the married couple, they are probably on their own cycle, place on that cycle. And after winter, spring's going to come back around and whatnot.
Yeah, that's a really good point to bring up. I noticed, I was going to ask you about the hair color changes. I have it written down under symbols. Maybe we can get to more of those in a bit, but I didn't correlate the specific colors to seasons, which is a very, very interesting idea. And I think ice and winter is definitely. But why is it that everything is always cold? Why is it that they lay down on the ice and you see the ice the cracked ice of the Charles? Why is it when they seem to be, he's going through his memory, it's often winter. When they meet, it's, they're shivering. I wonder, is that part of the cycle because spring is coming again and they're in the interim period, or is that something else, do you think? Is there another meaning behind the winter motif that seems to be more than any other season?
So the symbolism I saw with the ice, like in the scene where they're on the pond and she kind of pulls him on, he's saying, I'm scared. What if it breaks? And she pulls, and then they end up laying down and, looking at the stars. I saw the ice representing kind of the frailty or the how delicate a relationship is, in that like at any moment it can break, and that there's this kind of this kind of beautiful thing that can break at any moment. And there's a point where he says, she's kind of goading him to come on to the ice, and he says to her, like, I'm scared, what if it breaks? Which you could think that he's saying that about the relationship. I'm scared, what if it doesn't work out? What if I get hurt? What if this ends poorly? And she says to him, do you even care right now? Which I took to mean, like, does it even matter right now? Do we have to think about that right now? Can we not just, enjoy this moment? So yeah, at least in that specific scene, I saw the ice as kind of representing their relationship, and that, it was kind of her that was pulling him to take the leap of faith.
And that's a suggestion of growth, because when they're experiencing his last memory, when they're going through the last memory of them being in the house together, she's about to be deleted from his life, and she says to him, this is it. And she says something to the effect of, what do we do? And he says, let's enjoy it. And then he's the one who pursues her after she says, I can't be here anymore. At the end, she's about to leave. He walks out and says to her, wait, let's see where this goes. And then he's the one who says, come out onto the ice with me, right? So this is kind of suggesting maybe a growth or a development. His maturity is increasing. He's maybe realized something, at least something new to take into the next cycle, which hints at, maybe it is a cycle, but hints at this sort of spiraling cycle as opposed to a flat circle. Not a flat circle. It's a three-dimensional spatial spiral. It's going like this, but it's moving in a direction, and that direction, you're allowed to bring a new thing with you with each time that you go through the cycle. And the new thing that he brings with him is maybe a slightly more developed sense of himself, and a willingness to risk loss or the relationship breaking, as you said, for the benefits of having a genuine relationship with it, which is extremely rare to find.
Right.
To find a partner.
Right. Well, and he's gained some courage from the first go round, because the very first time they met, was on the beach, and they break into that house, and he gets scared, and he like runs out of the house. It's actually, the scene is set up very similarly to the ice scene on the pond, where she is like, come on inside, you big baby. And he's just like, oh, I'm scared, we shouldn't be here. And in that scene, so the very first time they met, he actually does run away. So yeah, I think it does show the growth in that, like, later on he chooses to stay.
Yeah, and also he runs away again when they meet the second time on the night of, when she invites him in for a drink, and her intention is to sleep with him, and he says, I have to go. And he says, I have to go because he doesn't want to ruin it. He's at that moment, he's afraid because they haven't experienced the crisis yet, because the crisis is the breaking of the ice, and the breaking of the ice allows you to discover a new layer. Oh, there's more stuff down here. When the ice breaks, you find a ruby or something. You find something else down there, and it's not just a bottomless pit that you fall down forever, right? So he is reverting back to his usual turtleish self, and then when he discovers the truth that he's been in a relationship with this person, he experiences a development. He experiences a growth through crisis, right? Which is the sort of hero's journey idea, right? The hero is defeated the first time always experiences a loss. Without the loss, if you just go and you kill the dragon the first try, then what you get is not as powerful as what you would get if you were to get the thing which allows you to slay the big dragon, right? So you lose the first time, then you fall through the ice, you find a magical gem that you put on your sword and it gives it more power, then you return and you fight the dragon again, having learned something, slay the dragon and bring back the boon to your village, right? So I'm not saying it totally maps on, but there's something about the hero's journey in the repetition with a thing added.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. I was going to ask about, because it is about memory, so I was going to ask you about the relationship between memory and self. I mean, surely there have to be some takeaways about the relationship between memory and self. Are we our memories? Is the self something totally apart from memory? Is it a kind of strange duality? Do you have any takeaways there?
Yeah, no, it got me thinking a lot about. You familiar with Daniel Kahneman's terms like the experiencing self and the remembering self?
Yeah.
So for anybody who's not familiar, Daniel Kahneman is a behavioral economist. In his book Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about we effectively have these two different selves. We have our experiencing self, who is basically answering the question, how is this? So if I were to eat an ice cream cone or something, and you were to ask me, how is it, scale of 1 to 10, that would be my experiencing self answering that question. If you were to ask me later, how was that ice cream cone, or a week later, that would be my remembering self. And what he has found through a lot of different studies is that there is that these two, our experiencing self and our remembering self, often do not agree with one another. In that
they communicate only by facts.
Yeah, they communicate, but a lot of things that we really enjoy the experience of, we might have a memory of that might be sour, or and they he's actually tested this with doing like different procedures where they'll give like a somewhat painful operation to people and kind of ping their experience while they're having this procedure done, and then this procedure will end in a like a good, not a good way, but in a less painful way. And their memory of the procedure is actually better than a procedure where the experience is much better, but it ends poorly. So he found that basically the take home is that we tend to remember our experiences based on how they end disproportionately to the entire experience itself. So
give your kids candy after you beat them.
Right. Give your kids, yeah, exactly. So it made me think of this movie in that at the end of this relationship, both Joel and Clementine are basically seeing this relationship as a failure, as a net loss, and something that we want to get rid of. And for Joel, it isn't until he's actually getting his memory erased and kind of reliving all these experiences that he remembers how great it was.
Right.
So he definitely has this cognitive bias going on. This kind of, it's called the peak end rule, is how we tend to inflate the end of experiences. So I definitely thought about that a lot, and how much, I guess how much how we really have to be a little skeptical at first, at least, of our remembering self, and say, hold on, okay, is this actually all bad, or did I actually enjoy parts of this? And I think that as time goes on, if Joel had not had his memory erased and had, kind of moved on from the relationship and gave him another couple of years, or, even if we saw Joel as an old man or something, I think he would have remembered those good experiences and had been glad that he had them.
Yeah.
But in the kind of heat of the moment, he was only able to kind of see it as a net negative.
Yeah, that's a good I think a good takeaway. Is the experiencing self the more animal version of the self? Is it the version of the self that experiences the world in a more sensory way, and the remembering self is the sort of more contemplative layer on top of that we got when we became more sentient, and so for that reason we can't, the remembering self actually often doesn't inform our actions because the experiencing self has all the levers. If that makes sense. Does that fit into that model, or are they all just parallel things?
Well, I know he says, like, it's the remembering self that makes decisions, and that actually the experiencing self is sort of a remembering self in the sense that, like, even if I ask you, how is this right now, you're still answering the question after the experience. It's just, very close in time to the actual experience. So I think it has more to do with, as time goes on, the memory starts to change, and we start to kind of distort that memory in different subtle ways.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers. Yeah.
No. I was asking if there was one that was more sort of one in the room with the levers more so than the other. That's all.
Yeah.
By levers, I mean, here you are. You're either Joel or Clementine, and you're confronted with ideas, and the ideas are that this person is bad for me, and if I do this thing, then this thing will be bad. That's the idea. That's the intellectual concept that I can fully grasp. And yet, there's something that is compelling me much more strongly. Whatever's in the room with the levers is pulling the levers to say, just do it anyway. It's about a cognitive dissonance or whatever, but I don't know if that relates to the experiencing and the remembering self. But what I was trying to get at is, I think that our intellectualizing of things and the way that we sort of contemplate ideas and the actions that we've taken, I think we less often take action based on rational thought and much more so on processes that we're not even really in touch with. We don't know where the decision happens. It's happening, down at around the reptilian control center level, and it percolates up, and then we have the White House press office that says, now let me tell you why I made that decision. And I made the decision, but actually we didn't make the decision at all. It was made, well, when I say we didn't make the decision, I mean the homunculus didn't make the decision. The little man in there didn't make the decision. The tiny little Zach, who thinks he has the levers, they're actually just fake levers that the deeper part of the brain has built to make the little Zach homunculus guy in there, thinking he's pulling the lever, think that he's pulling the levers. But actually, he's just writing press releases, right? So that I don't even know if those two things are necessarily related to the thinking and the remembering self, because I'm only kind of familiar with the ideas that you're talking
Yeah.
about. I've heard them, but I haven't actually read them in depth.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they are, but I mean, I think that's definitely an important point in that. Yeah, a lot of our intellectualizing is actually done after the fact.
Yeah.
We make these decisions impulsively or, subconsciously, and then we, after the fact, rationalize, oh yeah, I really, this is why I made the decision.
Yeah.
When that story is actually just something we kind of piece together after.
How many times has a friend asked you for advice, right? And then you really think carefully about it because you want to be a good friend, and then you tell them what you think, and they do exactly the opposite. And they were always going to do the opposite. And when they say what they're going to do, you know that they were always going to do it, and they just wanted a reflecting surface to justify something, or it's just about the narrative of the decision. The decision was made long ago.
Oh, totally.
Many layers down, right?
Well, and I think we also unconsciously ask people for advice that we think are going to give us the answer we want to hear.
Yeah.
Like I already kind of have made up my mind, but I know Luke, and I know that if I ask him this question and if I frame it in this certain way, that he's going to give me the answer I want to hear.
Right. That's my policy is whenever people ask me any advice, I always just say, don't do it. You'll regret it, no matter what it is. Should I marry my fiancée? Don't do it. You'll regret it. Anything. It's my rule. I have a one answer rule.
Wow. Well,
should I get life insurance? Don't do it.
Actually, if you should change it to the opposite, because we actually, like later in life, people regret the things that they didn't do.
Right. I want people to regret things that makes that. I don't have the same policy for myself.
I didn't know you had a malicious intent.
It's malicious. It's malicious. But for myself, I always try to do things. I tell myself the opposite. Do more things, just for others. I save the positive action for myself.
Gotcha. It's very it's very Patrick of you.
Yeah.
I was going to ask. Oh, I was thinking Patrick from the movie.
Oh, okay.
I was going to ask you, like, this movie is kind of a sci-fi look at, a kind of not too distant future technology. What are your thoughts on like memory editing, memory erasing, Google Glasses, kind of where the future lies in terms of like memory technology? Like, do you see it? Do you see a future headed in this direction where, there's going to be services offered to kind of like delete parts of our memory? Or do you think we're headed more towards a future where it's going to be all about like, recording our memories and kind of inserting like a neural link and
well, I think that the hardware is going to come before the software. So externalizing memory into hardware is something we already do. We speak into tape recorders, and for example, we make recordings. So it's something we make paintings. We've been doing it for thousands of years.
Yeah.
But it's just things that are thrown off in the moment, right? It's just tiny little flickers that fly out. But actually putting actual memories down would probably come before memory manipulation. I don't know, but it seems like things that are external tend to go before things get internalized, right? You develop technologies, and once those technologies converge in a way that's very stable, then you maybe you can internalize them, like a pacemaker, for example. All of the components are very well developed and stable, and then you make a pacemaker that allows your heart to keep pumping at a regular pace. I think the thing that's really interesting is more when it comes to what it means to have a memory in relation to decision and how technology already affects that, right? So I outsource a lot of my decisions for preferences to algorithms that are already learning who I am and what I should choose next. So rather than face the sort of overwhelming task of looking at things by most viewed, for example, on YouTube, YouTube is tracking aspects of me based on things that I've clicked on before and is making algorithmic decisions about what I should do next. But when that starts spreading and getting broader, and this is largely from Homo Deus, I don't know if you've read that one, but when that is, what if I don't need to date 9 people before I find my perfect match? What if algorithmically that gets figured out for me, and I have a website that I go to, and it has much better than any dating website currently. It has my perfect mate, right? There's a great episode of Black Mirror called Hang the DJ, in which this goes on inside of a program, and it's experienced. There's this series of relationships that happens inside of this, but actually it's just an algorithm playing out thousands of iterations of a relationship until it gets to a 98% likely match, perfect match rate. So the end of the episode, spoiler alert, is just 2 people walk into a bar and see the perfect person that they've been matched with. But the entire episode has been this algorithm playing out a training model on these 2 people's personality types. So I'm more interested in, I mean, who knows when we'll be able to delete memories. I'm sure we'll be able to figure out how to do that at some point. You can already manipulate, rats in that way. Who knows when we'll have really good memory storage where we can think thoughts that then print onto a hard drive that we can play back and watch as a video, or maybe our dreams or whatever it is. Who knows? But the more interesting thing is, if all of my decisions that are important, like who to vote for, what to wear today, who to date, what to eat for lunch, and all of the things that I think I decide now, that my deeper self decides, get outsourced to an algorithm or algorithms that know these things better than I can know them myself, because they can do calculations on probability of success, and they can see that this person is someone I will probably not divorce, because they not only in the short term but in the long term satisfy my psychological needs and will be likely to develop alongside me in a specific way. If that happens, then am I remembering myself now, or am I just a sort of intermediary between the algorithms, and the algorithms are now me, part of myself? They're sort of an externalized version of me, and then the actions are just an externalized version of the action, in which case I am just a vehicle for algorithms. And so the actions are remembered in the things that happen in the world, and the things making the choices, that's the algorithm, and I'm just carrying them out, and whether I remember them or not doesn't matter. So I'm really just watching a movie. And so then life is just a movie that I'm watching, and is less so sort of this process of figuring out who I am and going to ashrams and making mistakes and going to jail for graffitiing walls. So I think that's more interesting. That's more near term.
No, right. And it kind of, I think with all of that, it at least for me, it leaves me thinking, okay, well, there are decisions that I want to make correctly 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. And there are other decisions that I think some of the beauty in life is making perhaps a bad decision, or, in the kind of dating algorithm. Like, I don't know. I feel like I don't know that I would want to only go on dates with people that I'm 100% compatible with. I mean, in a sense, like there is a sort of joy of going on a terrible date, or something like that. Whereas,
are you gonna name names?
No names. But
name names.
But I don't know if that makes sense. Like I think there's decisions where I would want those algorithms in place so that I'm, making the proper or the best possible decision for. But there are other decisions where I don't know. I might not want to have that.
But couldn't that be just a habituation to the state of affairs as they are now? You know, you have to acknowledge that maybe you feel that way, but just as my grandparents yell at my younger cousins for constantly being on iPads, there's a habituation to the norm, and my grandparents think that that's insane. And to my younger cousins, nothing exists outside of it, really, because the iPad is a window to a richer life. And I don't make judgments about either one. I don't necessarily think that one is wrong. So if there's a habituation to a norm, then there are going to be those who embrace it and those who don't. So you're going to be, the guy who loves. You're going to be the guy who loves rock music and long hair when no one else is doing it. You're the rocker guy, and people go, yeah, he's one of those guys, and everyone else is doing something else. And so there are going to be people who embrace it and those who aren't. So really what you're doing is what the Amish do, right? The Amish just reject it, and they live their own lifestyle because they think that the struggle is good. They think that being closer to God means the strife of growing crops and all of it. It's more power to them. I don't judge them, but I just wonder if when we make statements like that, we say them because we're just used to that actually it's going to happen anyway, whether or not we like it.
Yeah,
trend,
well, I
right?
mean, right. But I think maybe like getting back to the movie in the sense that, you were saying this kind of like somebody kind of choosing to do something because they're embracing the struggle, or they're kind of making the harder choice or the harder decision. I mean, I look at that as like, it's hard to know whether or not choosing somebody, choosing to only go on dates with somebody who you're 100, most likely to be compatible with, is in a sense seeking the kind of like romance or relationship that doesn't have struggle and pain. And
well, that's an assumption. That's
same,
assuming that the algorithm doesn't know that struggle and pain in a relationship is the essence of a perfect relationship.
This is true. Yeah. I don't know.
Like I love in the movie where the Howard's wife comes in the car, right? And she's pissed off and she hits what's his name? I can't.
Stan.
Stan. Jeez, I keep forgetting Stan's name. The Hulk. Stan Lee. She hits him and she's pissed off again, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of joy in that moment of this is part of it. And if we ask these people in 30 years how they felt about this moment, they're going to say, it was important to me. It was important to my development. I wouldn't delete it, in other words, even though I saw my husband cheating, even though I had this affair. Affairs, that's part of life. Getting pissed off because you have this life with your husband and you find him, again, cheating with the same person. That's another part of life. And getting back to the algorithm thing, we assume that technology is going to try to sort of purify things to filter out the negatives. But if it's really an algorithm that's finding the perfect thing, then it knows that humans require both order and chaos, and that those things have to be in balance. And that if we live in order and in a sort of static environment, then we lose purpose and meaning. And if we live in complete chaos, then we get overwhelmed and stressed. And it would, if it were doing its job, factor that in and say, you're likely to fight with this person enough to have to be able to have an overall positive experience with them and stay with them, but not so much that you aren't a perfect fit for each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think it depends a lot how the algorithm is set up. Is the algorithm set up for kind of optimization and productivity, or is it set up for kind of human well-being and giving people the most meaning in their life? Because a lot of times those things are at odds, in that, like, having a really messy breakup or divorce might, be good for my well-being or kind of general life satisfaction in the long term, but it's gonna, fuck up my job performance or my my kind of ability to produce.
I'm picturing a bunch of algorithms in a room thinking, all right, what are we doing? What are we doing this week with Luke? Romantic partner algorithm. What are you thinking? I'm the career algorithm. Let's workshop this. I'm gonna put a few ideas on the board. We're gonna like build a plot or a narrative for each person.
No, but an algorithm suggests that we know what it is that we want, or we know what it is that is going to make us happy.
Yeah.
Which some of the, online dating is getting better, but some of what is telling about online dating is a lot of times what people say they want in their profile is not actually what they want in reality. Or, I may say I want this type of person, but in reality, this type of person is who I keep being drawn to and who, makes me happy. So I think in the same sense, you have to ask, like, the question is, if we set up this algorithm based on, okay, what I want is a, kind of happy life that mitigates suffering and kind of allows me to pursue my goals and activities, it might draw out certain decisions that would lead you away from what actually gives your life meaning.
It's a really interesting question, and it's so hard to even think about, because look at the YouTube algorithms. If you were to sort of embody the algorithm of YouTube and say, what do the humans like? They would say drama.
Yeah.
The Paul brothers. We like the things that are not necessarily intellectual. We like the negative side, the things that feed our desire to see conflict. The same reason that the gladiatorial competitions were held in Rome, right? You have to, in order to reduce the violence in the streets, you have to let the people go to watch people slaughter each other, because it's a release for you, and then you're less inclined to violence, right? That's a large part why they did that. And the gladiatorial games did have a huge impact on the violence in the streets, on people actually fighting, because you could vicariously experience the violence by seeing a guy have his face ripped off by a lion, and you feel good about that, and that's why video games are so popular. That's why you see 55-year-old guys in sports jerseys they maybe shouldn't be wearing, because they're vicariously experiencing this through these. More power to the people who love sports. It's great. But I think that at base level, these are just kind of things that allow us to vicariously live, right? And so I think the danger for the current state of algorithms is they don't know that tapping is very easy, and often taps are determined by the people who want to go see the gladiators and not necessarily our higher intellectual selves who will watch a 3-hour video about two people talking about a movie that involves a lot of philosophy. This video, for example.
It's short term versus long term satisfaction, in that the cheeseburger might be what I want in the moment, but the salad is going to, satiate me and maybe make me happy 4 hours from now.
Yeah.
In the same way that, like, watching a really polarizing video that's gonna, hold my attention for the next minute might be what I want then. It might actually be the opposite of what, makes me happy with my life, or in a couple hours from now.
Yeah. So maybe the more near term is that those are, instead of asking a friend for advice because your friend's opinion is as random as anybody else, then you ask your romantic algorithm their advice. They give you a recommendation, and then you say, well, I'd like a little chaos. I'm going to go ahead and go on a date with this lunatic who might be interesting for the next 2 weeks, but then we'll have a violent breakup. And that's what you've decided, but you've taken into consideration that there is maybe something that would benefit you longer term.
Right.
Yeah. It's the intermediary stage. That's Hegel's dialectic, right? It's the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? First we have maybe something that goes too far, which is this polarizing thing, and then it swings back the other way, and then it sort of combines the two, but it's a new thing in a forward direction, right? That's not just a totality of the two. Not that I'm an expert Hegelian, of course, but I was reading. I came across a quote. I want to ask you about some of the imagery and symbols. I want to get into that.
Yeah.
But I came across a quote that I really like that seems to tie into so as I understand it, the dialectic, sort of the Hegelian dialectic, is progress by stages, but not in a simplistic sense, right? Progress by stages of a sort of pendulum swinging back and forth, and also forward in time, in a sense. It's a very sort of second grade understanding. And I was just thinking about this because I was thinking about Joel and Clementine, they fall in love, this positive thing, and then they swing back to the other side. They break up. They have a horrible ending, and then they come back to a new point, but it's a new point not in the same place as the first new point. It's a new point in their romance, which is, I think, something along the lines of the synthesis, right? But something also doesn't feel quite right about this idea of progress forward in terms of relationships, because relationships are always chaotic and things always go wrong, and they tend to decline in the sense of the married couple in the movie declining. You know what I mean? You reach this point of, things are fine. So I found I was just reading Kierkegaard on this, and I found a sort of because Kierkegaard didn't like Hegel's dialectic, so he had a sort of anti-dialectic, which I found this quote, and I really like it, and I think it pertains. So I'm just going to read it and let me know what you think. Marry, and you will regret it. Do not marry, and you will also regret it. Marry or do not marry, you will regret it either way. Whether you marry or you do not marry, you will regret it either way. Laugh at the stupidities of the world, and you will regret it. Weep over them, and you will also regret it. Laugh at the stupidities of the world, or weep over them, you will regret it either way. Whether you laugh at the stupidities of the world, or you weep over them, you will regret it either way. Trust a girl, and you will regret it. Do not trust her, and you will also regret it. Hang yourself, or do not hang yourself, and you will regret it either way. Whether you hang yourself or you do not hang yourself, you will regret it either way. This, gentlemen, is the quintessence of all the wisdom of life.
Wow.
That's pretty interesting, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What stood out to me was interesting because, like, the data on this that we have shows pretty much the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
In that, when you look at people who are married, and you ask them if you're happy with that decision, and they say, absolutely, best decision of my life. You ask the people that chose not to get married, and you say, are you happy with that decision? They say, absolutely, best decision of my life. So the fact that he's saying like the opposite here, I know that initially stuck out to me. But yeah, I'm curious, what to you in that quote resonated?
Well, you said people on their Tinder profiles don't put what they really want, right? So
they put what they think they want.
They put what they think they want, just as they say they're happy. So I do think that there's a bit of a sort of polemical flair happening here, where I just want to I got to punch this idea in the face because I don't like it. So there's definitely a bit of that happening. But I think it's important to recognize the potentiality that we always think about but push to the side because we like to think that the direction our lives go in is the right direction, right? And so that doesn't mean we're not happy. That doesn't mean that when we get married we're not satisfied with that choice, and when we're single we're not satisfied with that choice. But I think this is acknowledging this other thing that is always a sort of a thought bubbling under the surface, which is what if I had, what if I could have, maybe if I had. And Kierkegaard's whole thing was that the basis of life is suffering, right? But not suffering in the simple sense, right? Suffering in a more existential sense. He kind of invented the existential crisis, but his solution to it was a lot different than the guys who came later. His idea was then, what do? You embrace the irrational. You embrace chaos. You believe in something that doesn't make any sense, and that's the only answer. And so I like that answer to the question, to the existential question. And I think what he's saying here is you can't just say that progress is progress because it looks like progress, because the human is a complex animal, and we have to acknowledge that this thing about ourselves, which is always developing a mirror image, a dark image to what is going on in our lives that we try to justify, that it's always there and part of us. And without an acknowledgement of that, call it the Jungian shadow if you want, without the acknowledgement of that, we're not complete. And if we do acknowledge it, and we try to bring those thoughts that happen, while at the same time we may try to justify, we also admit that, I do have regrets about this, and I actually do feel bad about this thing that happened to me, that somehow we can experience a more true version of ourselves, right? A more genuine version of ourselves. That, maybe that's not exactly what he was getting at here, but that's what I took from it. And I think that this sort of experience of going through a crisis and then choosing to re-enter the relationship with Joel and Clementine is this kind of acknowledgement of the horror of happiness. This is the acknowledgement of the necessity of misery and suffering and chaos in order to be more whole or be more complete in a sense. This is kind of tangentially related to the Jungian shadow, is that if once you say to yourself, yeah, I guess I could be a Nazi. Once you say that to yourself, then you are less then you know that about yourself, and you're aware somehow of more. Your surface area is greater, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're happier. But it does mean, I think, that you're more yourself, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it made me think of too, like, kind of the opportunity cost in each decision we make. So he's basically saying you choose to get married, you'll regret it. You choose not to get married, you'll regret it. In the sense that any decision you make, you're, by definition, not making the opposite decision.
Many others, yeah. Opportunity
Many
cost
others.
is a good way to say it, yeah.
Yeah, and it's I don't know if you're familiar with the Unbearable Lightness of Being. It's a novel by Milan Kundera, and it discusses that.
I've heard of it, but I don't know it.
Yeah, it discusses that this kind of existential question we all deal with is. He defines it in terms of like there's heaviness and there's lightness. So heaviness looks like responsibility and maybe a family and marriage and duty and having to be at your job at a certain time and having people depend on you. Lightness looks like freedom. Maybe you're single. You're not bound down to anything else. And that in these two ways, whether you choose one path or the other, you're by definition closing the opposite door. So in the way that the kind of like 9-to-5er who has bills to pay and got married right out of high school and never left his hometown, he is kind of looking at the lightness and kind of saying like, oh man, wouldn't it be great to kind of for all this to go away and to travel to Nepal and kind of idealizing this other life. Whereas the person who is on the opposite end of that spectrum, maybe never settled down and doesn't really have any responsibility, doesn't really have anybody depending on them, kind of looks at the person with all of this heaviness and kind of laments like, oh man, wouldn't it be nice to have a relationship with somebody that that I've have a relationship with a man or a woman that I've known for my entire life, and to have
something deeper,
know everybody in my hometown.
I just flit around like a butterfly, and there are no depths to my
right
internal
and
life.
so it's basically like he's looking at that. There's always going to be this kind of like glass half empty if you look at it in that way. In that
isn't that Camus' answer? Isn't that Camus' answer to not committing suicide?
I thought his answer was to enjoy the suffering, enjoy the carrying the boulder.
Right.
But I think what this is saying is like, there's an opportunity cost to whichever one of those roads you kind of go down. You're, if you don't get married, you're by definition,
right. But I think then but Camus' answer is more in the middle, because it's finding joy in the responsibilities that you do have, and not necessarily taking on all responsibilities, because all you have is the boulder. You're not so weighed down that you can't think or operate, right? But you do have a heavy boulder to roll up the hill. That reminds me what you were saying of this sort of dichotomy between the lightness of being and the heaviness of being. Those two, is that
sure,
the two?
Yeah.
So, Jordan Peterson's book, Maps of Meaning, is about the line between the two things, that humans are basically cows in the sense that we need a burden, We need a boulder. But at the same time, we require chaos in order to have any sort of rejuvenation. And having rejuvenation in culture or on the individual level is essential. So if it's entirely structural, then you're that sort of depressed person who's weighed down by finitude.
You're Joel.
You're Joel, right? You're the Kierkegaardian bound.
Yeah.
You're the person who has all limbs tied down, right? Not in a sort of kinky way, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's the only thing you have. But maybe that's the only thing you have. So you have all these responsibilities, but then you have a weird and kinky sex life, and that's a little bit of a chaos, in a sense, that rejuvenates you, and you walk the line between them. And it's not walking the line in the sense of a sort of centrist politician. It's walking the line in the sense of knowing that in order to be a balanced person, you have to have structure, and there is wisdom in the past. And if you're always postmodern about everything and you just say anything before 5 minutes ago may mean what they say it means, but I don't think so, and I can just invent whatever I want right now, you might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater to not look at a couple things that Jesus said, a couple things that are in these old myths over here, and these useful stories, and these fairy tales that you heard when you were a kid. Look at those things, but don't allow those things to tie you up into a ball so tight that you can't move, because without a little of the chaos coming in from the outside, without a little risk, without a little danger, without a little uncertainty, without maybe dating that person you know is probably not a good fit for you, but you know that you want to do it, without a little of that, or at least a balanced amount of that, then you fall into despair. So there's either side is bad news, either destruction or despair, right?
Well,
so you walk in the middle.
Yeah, and we could even map kind of order and chaos onto Joel and Clementine. And Joel is kind of just this tyrannical order, just boring monotony, and Clementine is this kind of chaotic chaos. And ultimately, the kind of blending of them is, I think, mostly good for both of them, in that it's kind of it's rounding out the missing side of their personality,
right?
In that same way.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what other symbolism did you see?
Oh yeah, let's get to that. Let's see here. We talked about the hair and the color changes. I think you covered that really well. We talked about cracking ice and winter. I also have some images that aren't quite symbols, and one of the an interesting symbol is, I think, tapes. The tapes. Why they use a lot of there are a lot of tapes, always putting in cassette tapes and listening to a recording. So that seemed very intentional. I know Michel Gondry loves tapes. He loves video cassettes. He's very into that, and I get it. I'm a big fax machine fan. I understand sort of that aesthetic, but I don't think it's purely aesthetic. I think just there's some intention to. There's something different between a CD and a tape, right? Because when you look at a tape, a cassette tape, you see the what is the word? Thing.
The tape?
Yeah. But on one side, well, no, what is you have the two circles, right? On this side it would be the spool. Is it a spool? Sure, it's a spool.
Yeah, that works, yeah.
So you have a spool, and there contains everything that is recorded. And here is an empty thing that will contain it once it's played. But the playhead is placed in the middle, and as the tape unwinds, it goes to the other side. So I think there's something very tangible and visual about that is hard to picture as well with a CD or another type of memory device.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was 2004, so there would have been there would have been CDs.
Eh.
I think it definitely allows you to see the kind of fast forwarding and rewinding in a visual sense, whereas a CD, all that's happening.
But it's also the externalization. You're also externalizing something. I mean, they're removing their memories from themselves, but not destroying them because they're still there, recorded on the tapes. Right. So if you were to play it in a linear fashion and forget about the memory erasing process, then what happened was two people had a relationship, it got stale, they broke up, they realized that they were still in love and they got back together again. If you forget about the memory part, okay, but the only thing that happened was the memory part was removed from them and then replaced in a condensed form. So instead of having the full text of the memory, they get just a summary of the last few years, right? So, but if you look at it at the broadest scale, it's just a normal relationship where they break up and get back together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You mean the main plot of the movie could still work without any memory erasing.
Right. So then the memory erasure process, and this is kind of what I saw as the main purpose of the symbol. I don't know if it's right or not, but when you are able to step back and look at something in a slightly more objective way, rather than being totally wrapped up in it and totally in a subjective sense, experiencing it and close to it. Any project that you may work on, you're so close to it, you don't know how good it is. It's really good, but you think it sucks, or it sucks and you don't know it sucks because you think it's great because you've been working with it and you love it. So we lose the ability to be objective, and it's a very visual way to sort of pull out this whole thing and say, basically, it's all here on this thing outside of you. Just listen to it. And when you listen to it, you're hearing yourself say it, right? So you're experiencing it in that way. And that's a way to say to you, if you're facing a problem, perhaps you are too tightly wound up in it and you're not able to look at it, really look at the whole picture. And if you were to do that, you might find that actually there are still many gems left to be mined, and you might want to continue after you reevaluate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that, like, the kind of thoughts and beliefs that we have when they're in our head, we don't even question them. We just kind of think, that's true. But when you're hearing somebody else say something, or when you're hearing yourself say the same thing on tape, like, I think one of the things, Joel says, like, Clementine, she just sleeps with people to get them to like her or something. So that's kind of a belief that he had. And when he's hearing it on the tape, I mean, granted, his memory had been erased, but when he's hearing it on the tape, he says, I don't actually think that. So that
he never did actually think it. He only says it out of resentment.
Mm-hmm. Right. And in that scene, you're right. Like, you could imagine this movie as their memories had never been erased. They just broke up and said a bunch of things that were mean about each other, recorded it, listened to it back, and then realized how absurd they were and got together. Yeah. Got back together. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. Because I think Gondry is good at that. He's good at taking something that's kind of an abstract process and saying it's a tape, actually a tape, and it's a tape, and you have these tapes because it's a finite little object, and it has the spool, and you see the memory there in this little spool, and you can imagine it going to the other side. And I just think it's kind of a perfect little thing that is a reminder to be objective when you can.
Right. Yeah. No, I like that.
There were a couple of images. The childhood fantasy where he's a little kid and she is projected into a specific she becomes a specific person. Did you read anything into that? Is that just a useful plot device, or him going back to his childhood and her being a specific Mrs. whatever?
Right, when she's like the babysitter or the
I haven't really thought through that very well. I don't know what to make
his
of
little yeah, I mean, it is not something that I thought of until you just pointed out. I don't know. I mean,
yeah, I don't know either. I know it seems like there's something. It seems like there's something there, but I'm not quite sure what it is yet.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was interesting that there were those scenes back from his childhood where he is kind of the epitome of the kind of ignorance is bliss model. He is being like the babe being washed in the sink and experiencing this this joy. So we do kind of get to see what that side of the coin looks like.
But it's not a kind of joy that we envy. We don't actually want that.
Right. Yeah. But he's
we think we want the simple joy that we had as a child, but then if we were to actually have it, we would be unsatisfied.
Right, exactly.
How about the spotlight? There's a use of a spotlight always on Joel when they're doing the memories. There's always a hard light on him. There's always a strong light in his face, often a strong light in his face, especially when he's when things get intense, especially when there's some intensity happening. There's this, it looks like someone's just holding a flashlight and pointing it at him.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that either.
Is that, I mean, that's not a symbol. That's just some imagery I noticed that I thought was kind of interesting choice.
Yeah. Well, there is also the question of the one thing I thought about was what we see in the movie might not necessarily be what actually happened in the relationship, because what we're seeing is his memory of all of these experiences. So yeah, I wondered how much we're supposed to kind of think, okay, maybe this isn't exactly how, their breakup went. Maybe she didn't, maybe she wasn't hammered or maybe she wasn't hammered in real life, but that's how he remembers her coming in and kind of blahing all over the couch. I don't know. So that's an aspect that I think they kind of leave ambiguous.
Yeah.
So that could also work with the spotlight in that, we're the hero of our own story and our own memories and imagination, and that he's kind of the centerpiece of it all.
It's that's a very good point. I like that, because they are also having conversations. It'll go kind of meta for a second, right? And the meta is they'll do the thing that they actually did in real life, and then they'll talk about the fact that she's being deleted, and they'll step outside of the scene, and then they'll go right back to it. She grabs his chicken, and then there's a comment about the fact that she's being deleted, and then he goes back to what he actually said. So it does hint at this idea of we're not getting we're not getting it as we would see it through a camera. We're getting it very much through his subjective lens, and the spotlight does help with that imagery. I mean, it might just be a supporting device. Yeah. Right. Good point. Did you notice? Did you notice that he's on? Yeah. Do you want to say something else about the light?
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Okay. Did you notice that when he goes behind the TV, that you see him on the TV?
Which scene are you referring to?
So there's a scene and it might be in the doctor's office in one room. I think it happens twice, if I remember correctly, where he walks in front of a TV, and instead of there being an image on the TV of whatever would be on TV, it's just him behind it, as though there were, but it's lined up exactly as though if there were no TV, right? So it's almost like there's a cutout and he walks past, but it is a TV image. It's distorted a little bit. So it's almost like there's a camera attached to the back of the TV that is broadcasting what it sees as he walks behind the TV, which is on the TV.
Yeah, no, I totally missed that. But what did you gather from that?
I don't know. I was thinking about it. It's really interesting, and I think it could be just to sort of reinforce this idea of him being on display to the people who are deleting him. You know, he's just a piece of technology to them in a way. His brain is just a piece of technology, and it's being pieces of it are being extracted, not in a sort of human compassionate way. It's just like this is you on the screen there, right? That's you. That's who you are, right? And so when he walks behind it, maybe I'm reading too much into it. It kind of feels like that's in part the view that we have of other people in general. That when we are around others and experience others, it's not that we do so maliciously, but we see others as bits and bobs that surround us that may serve us in various ways, or do things for us, or entertain us, or we don't want to dive deeper into these people's minds and understand them and have a deep connection. We want the lady behind the counter to give me the damn thing so that I can go. We want the bus driver to just drive the fucking bus. I don't want to know about these people around me. Just do the thing that you're supposed to do in the context of my life so that I can have my little experience here. And so it just made me think of this sort of two-dimensionalizing of all other people around us, right?
Well, yeah.
It's robots. This is a video game, and you're all NPCs in a sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of the Lacuna company, they are just kind of viewing their clients as, not actual people. I mean,
it's very unethical.
Scene where they're like, they're like getting high and like jumping on the bed next to his unconscious body, having sex like on his unconscious body. They're not actually viewing him as a living, feeling person. It's just kind of this like, like you said, two-dimensional view of the customer, or
right. Yeah, it's that scene's great. I think they don't do that for no reason. I think they want to sort of trivialize the seriousness of this thing. Is you're getting into someone's brain and you're removing parts of them, and you're smoking weed and dancing around and having beers. It's nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Listening to the Clash.
So unprofessional and so unethical.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
I think that we've really covered quite a bit in terms of the characters, and some of the things that are worth pulling out of the movie. Is there anything that you feel that you thought about that we didn't cover, that we didn't talk about? That's pretty much all I have. Those are my notes. Anything else?
The only thing I had was, we kind of covered it, was I think we talked about like the eternal recurrence, and another kind of motif is samsara, or reincarnation, and how kind of the goal of in a lot of those traditions is to kind of break out of the cycle, whether that is to become enlightened and reach nirvana, or in the Christian tradition, this life is, this life doesn't really matter so much. It's more about getting into heaven. That's what matters. And I thought it was interesting and maybe similar that, like, I think at the beginning, Joel is kind of viewing the relationship through that lens, and that, like, the point of the relationship, he says to her, she says to him, like, don't make me into a concept or an ideal. And he says to her, even though you said that, I still thought you were going to save my life. So he's still seeing relationships, or seeing her as a way to kind of like escape from the pain, or to kind of be the like happily ever after.
Yeah.
And I think what the movie concludes is that there's no happily ever after. And the kind of the point of the dance is the dance. It is not to have danced or to like get something at the end. So I don't know, there was that connection there.
Yeah. That's a good point probably to end on. I think, I don't know if he realizes it, but I think allowing him to see that he did think that in a very tangible way is what gives him the impetus to be the one to now make the move first and make the leap first, whereas that's not something he would have done ever before. He's been a runner-awayer before, always. And so this time, because he's maybe realized that this projection thing doesn't work very well long term, at least maybe a hint of that the next time it'll be at least an iteration that's more in line with the sort of long-term satisfaction you get from being with a partner, someone who you deeply respect, who is there for you and there for themselves, and you're there for yourself and there for them. And it's a togetherness that creates, not in a very fairy tale sense whole, but a whole where the two together are something greater. And I certainly feel that way about being married. That aligns with my idea of it. I think I'm a better person, and the whole is better than either of the two parts, or greater than either of the two parts.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Zach, thanks a lot. Thanks for doing the conversation. It's been fun. We'll have to do another of these at some point. I think this was a good choice. I wasn't quite sure what we were going to find. I knew it had, sometimes things have things there, but you're not sure what they are. And then you watch it with that intention and you discover a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find like movies that I keep wanting to rewatch over and over, that there's kind of something there that your mind's trying to figure out. It's kind of like having an earworm, when you get a song stuck on your head. It's kind of your brain trying to figure something out that
a part of yourself already knows, and you just haven't acknowledged it yet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll see you soon.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, we might be able to talk through it some more later on when we meet to pet some cats. It's a very weird thing to meet virtually, talk about something, and then meet in person in a cat cafe to talk about other things. It's a very strange thing that I never would have predicted that I would have done, but here we are.
No, you might not have predicted if you had a algorithmic device.
Right, it's a good case
brain.
For no algorithms. All right, Zach, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks. See ya.